We knew it was going to be hard because it was probably the first time that menstruation's like ever been talked about in the halls of the General Assembly. And we get down there and I have my speech. I'm ready to share it. We speak in front of the committee. And then within a matter of minutes, the Republicans kill the bill.
Hi, fellow Virginians. It's day one. Let's get to work.
On this episode of Pod Virginia, menstrual equity. Wait, did you say menstrual equity?
Look, all I'm going to say is that if you're curious about the actual way a bill becomes a law,
oh my gosh, people are so excited about this.
We followed this 6-year-long journey.
Don't give up.
Of one woman's idea.
I was determined to continue fighting and not give up.
To eliminate the sales tax on things like tampons and pads.
After 6 years of effort, the tampon tax has finally been eliminated.
We're joined by the force behind ditching the tampon tax, Holly Seibold.
Tampons and pads are not part of SNAP, People cannot use food stamps to purchase them.
We also consider the future of the Mountain Valley Pipeline.
Sometimes their interest in making a profit is in direct conflict with what's best for the public.
And we ask, what's the matter with Kansas? Or maybe there's nothing the matter with Kansas. Thank you very much.
Right now what we're seeing in polling is known as the blue Mirage in the summertime.
Stick around, because you are listening to Pod Virginia.
As many as favor that motion will say aye. Those opposed, no. The motion is agreed to.
I'm Michael Pope.
I'm Tom Bowman.
And this is Pod Virginia, the tax-free podcast on Virginia politics.
Very nice. Later in the show, you're going to hear about a 6-year effort to make a really simple change in Virginia law. It's something that seems so obvious now, and yet for one advocate, it was a struggle that took 6 years.
We'll hear from Holly Seibold. Now, she's the founder of a nonprofit organization called BRAWS that was originally created to distribute bras and menstrual supplies to homeless shelters, jails, prisons, and schools. Now, 6 years ago, she had a very simple idea: eliminate the 6% sales tax on menstrual supplies. So she teamed up with Senator Jennifer Boysko, and the two of them decided that the best way to approach this would be to avoid talk of menstruation.
Yeah, don't want to make those senators and delegates uncomfortable.
So Seibold and Senator Boysko were working together, and they were trying to figure out the best way to sell this to the Republicans who were controlling the General Assembly at the time. And so they decided that instead of talking about menstruation or women's issues, that they would frame this as the Dignity Act. So they decided to call it the Dignity Act. And finally, the day arrived. This was going to be appearing before the subcommittee. So Holly Seibold gets in her car before the sun comes up. She drives the 2 hours down to Richmond. She makes her way to the cramped subcommittee room so that she could give her prepared comments to the lawmakers who pretended to listen. And then guess what happened, Thomas? Well, this is how Senator Boysko describes it.
There was one amendment made to that bill. It was to strip the name, the Dignity Act, from the bill, and then they killed it.
Stripped the dignity from the Dignity Act, and then they killed it.
Classic. That doesn't surprise me one bit. And there's a lot more to this journey, right? So that's where it starts, but where it ends is actually Governor Glenn Youngkin campaigning on ending the grocery tax. And how are those connected? Why does that matter? Well, the story of advocacy for menstrual equity actually does have a happy ending, but you're going to need to stick around to find out.
Yes, you'll hear about that later in the show. Hey, before we get to the news, Thomas, do we have any new Patreons to thank?
Yeah, we do, Michael. Connie, thank you for becoming our newest Patreon.
Yes, Connie, thank you so much for helping us out. You know, we could not do the work we do on this podcast without support from listeners like you. So thank you to Connie, and thank you to all the Patreons who help support the show. Okay, let's get to the news. The fracking pipeline is back.
What the frack?
Frack and believe it, Thomas. The Mountain Valley Pipeline may soon be gushing fracked natural gas 300 miles from West Virginia to Chatham here in Virginia. Most of the Mountain Valley Pipeline has already been constructed. So this thing is like up and almost operational, but they need a whole lot of permits before they can actually connect the natural gas pipeline from West Virginia to Virginia.
Yeah, and environmentalists are worried that in the rush to secure Joe Manchin's vote for the Inflation Reduction Act, they might have bargained away a chance to cut down on fossil fuels in West Virginia and here in Virginia.
Yeah, I had a chance to talk with David Sly at Wild, Virginia about this, and this is what he had to say about the current situation.
Folks who want to build these things, they have a right to propose whatever they want, but sometimes their interest in making a profit is in direct conflict with what's best for the public as a whole. So that's why we have these processes. And that's not something we should let go of lightly.
Yeah, so this deal, that is being crafted in Congress is one thing, but it does not necessarily mean that the Mountain Valley Pipeline will happen. There's a whole lot of permits. You got a permit to cross streams. You got a permit to cross water. You got a court challenge in the Fourth Circuit Court. Part of this deal in Washington is theoretically you could move the jurisdiction of this lawsuit from the Fourth Circuit Court to the DC courts where it might get a more favorable rating, but moving the jurisdiction of a lawsuit sounds more complicated than just saying that's going to happen. And then also you're gambling. What if the DC courts don't like it either?
Yeah, and Michael, the real story is about how the sausage gets made. So Democrats needed Joe Manchin's vote on a lot of policies before the Senate, and Joe Biden needed to give Manchin something to make it worth his while. And one of those somethings seems to be the Mountain Valley Pipeline.
Yeah, and there's a lot of quid pro quo here. I mean, you've got health care benefits that will help people, with getting rid of the subsidy cliff, and you've got a long range reduction of emissions. So, I mean, you give a little to get a little, I guess, in the Washington parlance. And so by giving a little on fracked natural gas, in the long term, you get lowered emissions. That's the deal they're trying to cut in Washington. Do you think that's going to work?
Well, we'll see. As you noted correctly, Michael, this is a very complex process with a lot still to play out that may not be completely in the president's control.
Well, so one group that's always been skeptical of renewable sources of energy is manufacturers. So they say the sun doesn't always shine and the wind doesn't always blow. So what happens when you've got a factory and you need massive amounts of power, like 24/7 power, when the wind is not blowing and the sun is not shining? Well, I spoke to Brett Vassy at the Virginia Manufacturers Association about the importance of having access to power from natural gas. And this is what he told me.
The wind doesn't always blow, the sun doesn't always shine, and we have to have a consistent load all the time. That requires us then to have either backup or supplements, and right now, energy storage is not really there. Battery backup for a factory, it's not practical.
Now, this is a really important point. The storage of these renewable sources of power is an evolving technology, and right now, it's not where it needs to be. But by the time Virginia has its wind farm up, for example, or all these solar installations are out in Southwest Virginia, the technology of this kind of energy storage will be better. But it's not where it needs to be right now. And manufacturers, Thomas, they're worried. They got a factory. They got factories they need to run, and they've got 24/7 requirements for power. They need a whole lot of power. And from their perspective, the renewable source of energy just isn't cutting it right now.
Yeah, well, somebody might want to let Brett Vassy know that their biggest funder, Honeywell, actually makes that battery, and they have it in operation with Duke Energy in North Carolina. So I'm not really sure why he's saying this, but battery storage is improving and does exist. And, to his, I would say, very weak point about needing a consistent load all the time, that's not the factory's problem. That is the electricity provider's problem. And by the way, Michael, no generation resource, that's a power plant, it never runs 100% of the time. We have different power plants and different resources that the utilities and various grid operators pull together in order to make sure that there is enough supply of electricity to meet the demand on the grid as a whole. And this is not new. This is how electricity goes into your light when you flip a switch, right? So these power prices are a very significant expense for manufacturers. And right now, the price of fossil fuels is spiking. It's driving their costs way up. They wouldn't have to worry about these fuel prices with wind and solar. And the electrons, by the way, look the same. So why do they care? They should be for this sort of energy diversity to hedge against fuel price risk.
Well, you mentioned fossil fuels. There's a lot of distinction between energy from fossil fuels and energy from solar power or energy from wind power. And part of that is obvious with emissions, right? So fossil fuels contribute to emissions, whereas renewable sources of energy, for the most part, don't. I talked to our friend Harry Godfrey at Advanced Energy Economy about this, and this is how he explained it.
The fossil fuel plants are generally dispatchable. You flip a switch and the plant turns on and it provides more electricity, provided you have the coal, provided you have the natural gas or oil flowing into it. With wind or solar, we can't flip a switch and turn on the wind or turn on the sun. So as we make that transition, we need backup power to bridge those differences.
Yeah, so local governments across Virginia have been considering this sort of thing and will be considering this thing long into the future. I think there's been like 51 proposals across local governments across Virginia for solar installations. And you know how many of those 51 proposals have been approved, Thomas?
I see the number right here in front of me, Michael, but I know you just want to tell me.
It is in the script. You can tell me, Thomas, what of the 51 proposals, how many?
Wild guess out of nowhere. 44, maybe?
44 is the correct answer. Yeah, that's the vast majority of them have been approved. But it won't surprise you to learn that in most of those situations, you had opponents showing up to the Board of Supervisors that says, don't put this solar installation here. It'll be an eyesore. It will screw up this pristine environment that we've got. It'll look bad. We won't get tourism money because who wants to come out to
this pristine environment that now has like hydrocarbons polluting it and plastics everywhere and by the way, rainwater everywhere in the world, even at
the pristine environment of factory farming.
Yes, and pollution raining down on you with forever chemicals. Look, things like solar and offshore wind presents one of, if not the most promising opportunity to grow new manufacturing in Virginia and expand existing industries as they supply the parts and components as part of this supply chain. So Virginia manufacturers should be excited. They should be supporting development of these new technologies for the additional business they'll bring to the state.
Yeah, they want to make sure the power is there before they get on board with it.
Again, that's not their concern, but it is the concern of some of their donors. Like Honeywell makes a lot of industrial fossil fuel equipment for their other donor, Koch Industries, which is, of course, a conglomerate that, among other things, does a lot with chemicals and oils, petrochemicals, and fossil fuels generally, also the industrial scale technology of that. So there's a lot of money on the table, and that kind of explains where Virginia manufacturers are coming from. When you look at, according to VPAP, who is funding these guys, it is fossil fuel energy. And what they are trying to do is trying to represent themselves as somebody concerned about manufacturing in general, but their actual funders are concerned about specifically the manufacturing of fossil fuel equipment. So that would connect dots a little bit more for the listener, Michael. And I think it's useful to understand that the money trail here is how that goes to influencing the things that lobbyists say.
Yeah, I hear you. But if Honeywell makes a battery that can store power from, solar panels or wind turbines, then isn't that a solution here where everybody wins? Honeywell wins, the manufacturers win, and we get renewable energy?
That's just one element to consider, because it's in a vacuum that would make sense, but it's not a vacuum. You've also got things like scale, margin, and things that investors care about. So the amount of business they get out of fossil fuel dwarfs the amount of business that they might hypothetically be able to build on battery backups that they are constructing, and they are coming, but they'll have a lot of competition in that department too.
Let's talk about Kansas. Everybody's talking about Kansas. There was that huge vote last week 60% of Kansas voters said that abortion rights was something that they wanted to support, and the anti-abortion forces that had this statewide ballot initiative lost. So the abortion rights supporters won with a 60-40 vote, and so huge victory for abortion rights in Kansas. Everyone is buzzing about this. Is it an indicator of a blue wave? I talked to friend of the podcast, Chaz Nuttycombe, about this, and this is what he had to say to listeners of Pod Virginia.
This isn't any sort of indicator that there's going to be some big blue wave this November. I think when it comes to this November, right now what we're seeing in polling is known as the blue mirage in the summertime. Over the past several cycles, August and July are really great times for polling for Democrats. So I think the polling for the generic ballot and all these other contests will start to snap back into reality.
Oh, snap back into reality in the fall. So, we've heard of the red mirage, which happens on election night, where the first returns in are the people who voted on election day, and the trailing data that comes in much later is the people who voted early or the people who voted absentee. But until Chaz used this expression, I'd never heard of a blue mirage, which is essentially summertime polling, seems to indicate one thing. And then after Labor Day, you snap back to reality. Thomas, have you ever heard about a blue mirage over the summertime?
I've never necessarily heard it framed like that, but Michael, it's pretty well understood that there's a few things that go into creating this mirage, and among them is undecided voters, which narrow as we get closer and closer to election day. So it obviously depends on the year you're looking at as to whether it's a red mirage or a blue mirage. But the point is that the data at this point are unreliable when it comes to trying to figure out who's going to win. It's just a snapshot of public sentiment at the time. What I found really interesting, to Chaz's point, is that while many, many people who are Republican supported abortion rights and voted on that issue, they still voted for Republican candidates overall.
Yeah, in fact, Chaz had something to say on that. And let me play that soundbite here.
When it comes to actual policies, there are plenty of voters, Republican-leaning voters, conservative voters, who will vote with the Democratic position on referendums and constitutional amendments, but they won't vote for a Democrat pretty much ever.
Interesting. So they'll vote for the issue, but not for the Democrat. So, I mean, a lot of people have talked about this Kansas vote as maybe a predictor about things that might happen in November. But then you hear Chaz say, like those voters, they're never going to vote for a Democrat. So is this really a good predictor or not? I mean, can this give us any kind of predictive value for November?
Well, the amount to which a result in one specific state indicates a predictor for the rest of the country, is dubious at best. But what it does show is that even in a reliably red locale, you have considerable support for the right of people to seek abortions and to access abortions. And that means that if I were someone like the governor of Virginia saying that we should have a special session to settle this question, well, guess what? I don't want to tie my party to anti-abortion because it is enough. Like, we don't necessarily do referendums in Virginia unless it's a constitutional amendment. I don't want Democrats being able to tie my party to this issue that enough of my traditional voters actually care about in order to make it a potential problem for me and my party in November. That's what I would be thinking if I'm Glenn Youngkin. And Tommy Norment, I wouldn't be very surprised if Tommy Norment came around and said, well, I mean, Governor, if you want us to consider this bill, we'll do so in the normal order of things in January.
All right, before we take a commercial break, Thomas, let's head over to the water cooler and get a sense of what people are talking about this week. So my story here is from the Virginia Mercury. Graham Mumma had a great story. Federal judge throws out second redistricting suit seeking new Virginia House elections. So the story begins here. A federal judge is dismissing a last-ditch effort to force new Virginia House of Delegates elections in November, concluding that the pandemic-related delay in the state's redistricting process cannot justify the extreme step of ordering an election do-over. So you can relax, take a breath, go to the beach, enjoy the blue Mirage for a little while, because there will be no special elections for the House of Delegates this year.
And you know what? Last week we talked about the things we got wrong. Well, I'm going to give myself a little pat on the back for getting this one so right. Michael, I've got my own story too for the water cooler here.
Great. Yeah. What's in your water cooler?
So in case you missed it, this was from the Washington Blade. State Delegate Dave LaRock stands accused on video of destroying his neighbor's property. And he got triggered when some video cameras and pride flags were there, and which he says were just put up to provoke him. Shoot, man, this guy is the Rand Paul of Virginia. I'll tell you what, you don't want a neighbor like him. And I hear, by the way, he's moving into a new district.
I'm stuck on the concept of being provoked by a pride flag.
Yeah, I think that says more about him as a human being than about his neighbors. But yeah, so things are always wild. And all right, let's take a break, Michael, because we have a lot to cover, and we want to be here for the main event. So when we come back, we're joined by Holly Seibold. She led, like we said earlier, a 6-year effort to eliminate the sales tax on menstrual products. And this year, she finally achieved that goal. So we're going to learn all about that 6-year struggle next. Stick around.
This is Delegate Danica Rome of the 13th District, and you're listening to Pod Virginia with Michael Pope and Thomas Bowman.
And we're back on Pod Virginia. We're joined by the founder of a group called Bringing Resources to Aid Women's Shelters. You're probably more familiar with the acronym, BRAWS.
BRAWS recently achieved a major victory, eliminating the sales tax for menstrual products. But it was a hard-won victory that took 6 years of trying and failing and trying and failing again.
What they tried to do over and over again was eliminate the tampon tax. Now, this year, lawmakers finally took action to eliminate the sales tax on menstrual products. That's after 6 years of trying by BRAWS. So pads and tampons will no longer have a state sales tax, and that's thanks to the work of our guest, BRAWS founder, Holly Seibold. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much, Michael and Thomas, for having me on your show.
We're glad to have you, Holly. So let's start at the beginning. How did this issue first hit your radar?
Well, I'd read an article in the Huffington Post about women who were working with domestic violence victims through the organization Dress for Success. And the story actually went viral, and it really made me think about how it would be such a challenge for me personally if I was in this particular situation and not be able to access pads and tampons and bras and underwear, and how particularly domestic violence victims who had been fleeing their homes in the middle of the night, trying to get back on their feet, trying to gain independence, get a job, and how how not having access to these products would really influence their future. And so I went and organized a collection drive in my home, and I asked for people to come and bring pads and tampons and underwear and bras, all brand new, because we wanted to make sure that women in these situations feel dignified and empowered so that they would be able to seek a new job. And people were really excited, and they just had never thought about this, and they wanted to help. And so then I proceeded to donate them to 3 different local shelters. And the staff of the shelters contacted me and was like, "Oh my gosh, people are so excited about this. Can you bring us more?" And so I, at the time, was, I had tapped out all of my friends, and there was nobody that I hadn't already asked to help. So I was like, what can I do to really bring in new support? So I reached out to local businesses and church groups, asked friends of friends to reach out to their friends and ask for support. And before you know it, we were helping many, many more shelters, and it was being scaled at a much higher level. And so by May of 2015, because a lot of people were asking to donate financially, I filed to become a 501c3 nonprofit. BRAWS was born, and I'm here speaking to you today about it.
So the more you learned about this, the madder that you got. And at some point, you realized the policy dimension of all of this. So there's two issues that popped out to you. One is that Virginia at that time had a 6% sales tax on menstrual products. So that was a problem. You wanted to address it. And the other one was that pads and tampons and menstrual products were not on the list of back to school exemptions for the sales tax holiday. So you reached out to your lawmakers, your local delegation there in Vienna, where you live. What kind of response did you get?
Yeah, providing direct service was very important to me. But at the same time, as you mentioned, I was really surprised about the lack of public policy and how it does not really meet the needs of women and girls in our Commonwealth. So I did reach out to Mark Keem, who was my particular delegate. And I also reached out to Chap Peterson, who is my state senator. And I met with Mark, and he told me that he had already tried and to introduce a bill and failed. And so he was reluctant to really introduce it again. Chap, he empathized with the need to reduce the tax. However, he definitely believed that there are some people who can afford to provide the tax, so it doesn't seem like a necessity to eliminate it.
So you're striking out with your local delegation.
Right. So then I reached out to Jennifer Boysko, who was a delegate at the time. She's now a senator. And she was excited about this issue. And we brainstormed on how we can introduce this bill and ways that would make it successful. We ended up calling it the Dignity Act because we thought at the time it was best to remove menstruation and women from the name of the bill so that it got more traction down in a Republican-controlled legislature. So to help with the success of the bill, we were excited to work with the Connection newspapers. Vienna Connection actually did an article about how this bill, the Dignity Act, is headed down to Richmond. NBC News at the time came in to try to draw attention to the issue as well. So we were in a really good position by the time session began in January.
So then Delegate Boysko introduces two bills. One that gets rid of the sales tax on menstrual products, and another that adds menstrual products to the list of items that have a tax exemption for back to school week. So you wake up early in the morning, you drive down to Richmond for a 7 a.m. meeting, you stand up, you make your case, then what happens?
We knew it was going to be hard because it was probably the first time that menstruation's ever been talked about in the halls of the General Assembly. And we get down there and, I have my speech. I'm ready to share it. We speak in front of the committee. And then within a matter of minutes, the Republicans kill the bill.
Classic. So, yeah, that's classic. This happens all the time in Richmond. But from your point of view, you had never seen this happen before, right? So to be in the middle of it, when you've put all this time and effort into something and they kill it within a matter of, it feels like seconds have gone by, right? How did you feel at that point?
Oh, it was shocking. I had never experienced it before. We felt prepared, as I mentioned. We had already, the media, and we had support, and I had practiced, and so it was it was very, it was the agony of defeat. It was very upsetting. But my kids were there, and we had a couple supporters that were in the audience, and we were at least happy to have been able to tell our story. And it was great because it was the first time we had actually been able to go to the gallery, and Delegate Boysko invited us to be recognized. And, just really, it was a powerful moment. And it was, again, my first time experiencing such, being part of government. And so I was determined, when I went home that day, I was determined to continue fighting and not give up.
So you keep up the pressure on lawmakers and you bring more of them on board, right? So you started with Boysko, but then you get Delegate Kay Corey involved, right? And she introduces a bill to make menstrual products available to people who are incarcerated in jails and prisons. What happened with that?
Yeah, well, we still were going to continue. Delegate Boysko is still committed to introducing the sales tax bill each year. So we knew that was already, on the table. We knew that it was going to be a harder sell with Republicans, but they did, during the year between sessions, we did get some support from Republicans on a bill that would provide access to those who are incarcerated. And so we went down to Richmond. We working with Delegate Corey. We were able to testify. There's another organization called Friends of Guest House who works with women who are trying to reenter society after being incarcerated.
Great organization located here in Alexandria.
It's awesome. And those women were so brave and courageous, and they also came down to testify. And I think it was a really powerful moment. And so with bipartisan support, the bill passed. And then we had this amazing moment after it was signed by the governor. While it was being signed by the governor, we actually got to go to the third floor of the Capitol. And, it felt very successful at the time. We were making progress, but we knew that sales tax was still ever present.
At some point, even Republicans start feeling pressured on this. And even Delegate Kathy Byron introduced a version of your tampon tax bill repeal, right? Like, what happens with Byron's bill?
So Kathy Byron's been on this committee for several years at this point, and she is very familiar with the Dignity Act. And so as a compromise, she introduced a bill that had gender neutral language, and it included, it was more about personal hygiene items that were still not tax exempt that should be. It included bed sheets and toilet paper, but she also included menstrual supplies in that bill.
So you've been working on this issue for quite some time. It's really focused on menstrual products. How did you feel about Kathy Byron sort of expanding this to a sort of a gender neutral way of looking at it?
Tampons and pads are not part of SNAP. People cannot use food stamps to purchase them. So bottom line is I'm happy when any legislator is working to reduce the cost of menstrual supplies. So, obviously I'm happy that it included it, and it will make the life easier of the women and girls that we support at BRAWS.
So thanks to the support of Kathy Byron, Delegate Byron works with, I guess this is at this point, Senator Boysko, right? So Byron and Boysko are working together, and you get a partial victory, which is you're not eliminating the sales tax, but it's reduced from like 6% to 2.5%, right? What happened with that?
It was a compromise between Senator Boysko and Byron. They were able to reduce the tax partially from 6% to 2.5%.
Okay, great. So then Democrats take power, and you're optimistic you might see some traction on this stuff, right? So you still can't get rid of the sales tax, but at this point, you're working to get menstrual products in the schools, and you actually bring a bunch of students to Richmond to testify. I was actually in one of these subcommittee meetings. Tell us about that experience.
Yeah, this was really important to me as a former teacher myself. Students were missing class because they didn't have access to menstrual supplies in school bathrooms. We had done a lot of research during the year, and we were able to bring some of those students who had been so generous with their thoughts to Richmond, and they were able to testify in person. And their story was compelling. And again, with bipartisan support, the committee decided to move the bill forward, but it was going to be an unfunded mandate, which meant that, yes, the state had said that that school districts must provide menstrual supplies in school bathrooms that serve middle and high school students. However, those school boards were going to be responsible for finding the money to fund it. And there are definitely districts in Virginia who were concerned about this because the cost for them was going to be significant. And so we still to this day are working with some of those school districts to help them find funding.
So just to review here, at this point, you've been able to successfully get menstrual products in jails and in prisons and in schools, and you've been able to cut the sales tax for menstrual products in half, but not yet eliminate it, right?
Right.
Okay. So then Glenn Youngkin campaigns on getting rid of the grocery tax. And that opened the door to getting rid of the tampon tax. How did that come about?
Senator Boysko introduced the tampon tax bill like she does every single year, but this time the circumstances were a little different because, as you just mentioned, Governor Youngkin campaigned on eliminating the grocery tax. So Senator Boysko introduced her bill that would remove menstrual supplies, and the Republicans were able to piggyback on that bill to try to eliminate the state. To try to eliminate the sales tax on all groceries. They were able to cut a deal. So the final outcome was that they were able to eliminate the tampon tax, and then they agreed to eliminate the state portions of the sales tax, but they kept the local government tax on. But at the end of the day, after 6 years of effort through this compromise, we finally have the tampon tax has finally been eliminated from the budget.
Ooh, after 6 years of trying and failing. And I mean, this is important for our listeners that might have issues that they want to bring before the General Assembly, is that, that first time you go to that subcommittee meeting, you wake up at 4 a.m., you drive the 2 hours down to Richmond, you make your presentation, and they kill the bill in a matter of seconds. That's not the time to give up, because you can come back the next year and the year after that and the year after that and the year after that. And finally, after 6 years, you've been able to achieve this goal of eliminating the sales tax on menstrual products. So how do you feel about that?
I feel fantastic. I hope it is a great lesson for your listeners that, if you have something that you want to change down in Richmond, try, pivot, tailor it to who is in majority at the time. Try to get what you can pass, and then don't give up, because look what happened here. If you work with your legislators and your community and make people understand the importance of why this will make a huge impact on those who need it the most.
I love that. It's a marathon, not a sprint. And 6 years is for a bill coming up as an idea and then eventually becoming a law is probably a little bit more accurate than anything you're going to get out of Schoolhouse Rock or your civics class. And I love this story, this narrative, and of course, your overall goal and accomplishment. So congratulations, Holly Seibold. Thanks for explaining how you were able to win this major victory for people across Virginia.
Thank you.
Pod Virginia is a production of Jackleg Media. Our producer is Arian Ballou. Our social media manager is Emily Cottrell. And our advertising sales manager is David O'Connell.
Find us on Facebook or Twitter. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And hey, write a review on Apple Podcasts. It really helps people find the show.
We'll be back next week with another episode of Pod Virginia.